Hey guys, welcome back to Trek on the Tube. I know it's been like 18 million years since Star Trek Discovery's finale was released, but better late than never. This is my full review and breakdown of Season 1. There's a lot to talk about and I have many mixed feelings, so as usual, I don't really know where to begin. I suppose to simplify things, we could always ask the big question first. Is Star Trek Discovery a good show? But that's not really fair considering only one season has been released, so a far more fair question would be, was the first season a good start? Well, yes and no. Alright, I think the best way to do this is first talk about TV in general, then transition into Discovery, so sit back, relax, and listen up as I try to give you some context. Discovery is a Star Trek show made in the modern era of television, the golden age of television, and it's also the first Star Trek show to be made in over 10 years. Those elements are already more than enough to see the project fail. Star Trek has always been utopian. Modern television is not. Star Trek in the past has mostly consisted of small, self-contained stories that some way or another metaphorically represented us and our problems, and usually everything was resolved with discussion. Modern television, however, promotes our problems with serialized action cut with intrigue, cliffhangers, big reveals. Most modern shows also heavily feature violence and sex. The few shows that manage to thrive outside these new ways live on simply because they perpetuate proven formats. Procedurals or medical dramas. The Good Doctor, for example, or Elementary. So, right from the get-go, Discovery had to find a way to blend the utopian, peaceful ways of the Federation and social commentary of the Star Trek of old with the more basic wants and needs of today's audience. Tough job, but it gets even worse. Most modern TV series live in the now. It's all about how people are going to react while they're watching. What show is going to create the biggest buzz on the internet that night or that week? And the problem is, that often leads to useless plot twists. Unwarranted character deaths that have no other purpose than to surprise the audience. A lot of shows go as far as bringing characters back to life. Multiple times. Just for the shock factor. But that in itself doesn't really make good TV. It's interesting in the moment, granted, but it has no real rewatch potential. Once you've seen the big reveals, there's no real point seeing them again. Unless the story that surrounds these moments is amazing. Think The Walking Dead. The first 3 seasons featured all these modern elements, shock deaths, big cliffhangers, complicated intrigues, but they also had character. Not only was the story new and gripping, but there was also this morbid ambiance, a gruesome oppression that would keep you coming back for more. Rewatching those first seasons will always be amazing, but now with seasons 7 and 8, the story has completely evaporated. Much like the dead themselves, the show has lost its heart, its soul. All that remains is a skeleton, aimlessly walking from season finale to mid-season finale. There's no substance whatsoever between each reveal. The acting is still great, the sets are still great, the directing is fine, most of the dialogue still works. On a technical level, the show still is good. It would just seem that the story has no longer anything to offer. But as I said before, we are in the golden age of television, so not everything has to fall into the same traps, or be as mindless as, say, Zoo. For the sake of comparison, focusing on modern science fiction and only seasons 1, to be fair, Westworld, The Expanse, and even to some certain extent Altered Carbon all managed to blend beautiful storytelling and amazing world building with action and intrigue. The reveals complement the story. Everything in the modern format is used to their advantage, but Star Trek Discovery somehow felt like it was trying to emulate that rather than actually doing it, and it made this first season kind of awkward. To be clear, from a technical standpoint, this season was mind-blowing. The sets, props, costumes were beautifully crafted. The CGI was what anyone would expect from a modern-day sci-fi show. The directing was great, and even if I personally wasn't a fan of the color palette, I can take a step back and admit that it creates a certain vibe, a uniqueness that helps one easily identify the show. This was certainly the most beautiful season of Star Trek ever made. But that's not all. I also found the acting to be good. Sinead Martin-Green's performance in the pilot episodes felt a little off, but that's probably because she was trying to be this Vulcan-like human, and Michelle Yeoh, as wonderful an actor she is, didn't convince me as the Emperor, but overall, the acting was solid. Doug Jones managed to somehow convey emotion through the heavy Saru makeup. Mary Wiseman was able to both be badass and funny depending on her version, and also found a way to blend those two people together when the time came. Chris Obi pulled off an amazing Takuvma. Shazad Latif baffled me with the way he changed his voice so radically, going from Tyler to Vok, and Jason Isaacs was Jason Isaacs. What more can I say? It's the story that didn't quite work, and the use and execution of the modern elements we talked about earlier. See, first of all, the scope. The scale of the events were way too big. The Federation at war, losing 80% of the fleet, being completely overrun and at the mercy of the Klingon forces, wasn't brought to life in a believable way. In the context of the story, there were not enough ships on screen, on either side. Not enough battles, not enough combats, not enough palpable loss, and genuinely painful moments. And let's face it, no actual threat. Because we've all seen what happens next, and we all know the Klingons don't wipe out the Federation. And then it all ends abruptly, in the most far-fetched manner imaginable. I'm not saying the war wasn't a good story to tell, I'm just saying having it all take place within one season, composed of only 15 episodes, was a bad move. These kind of narratives need to take place over time. Every single loss, every single death, needs to really sink in with the audience so that eventually, when the well-thought-out conclusion takes place, there's a real sense of payoff. As it stands, the war felt rushed and somewhat skimmed over. So, the Klingon war arc wasn't very well executed. That in itself is a problem, but what makes it worse is everything else going on at the same time. The season was so crowded, there were so many different and at times incoherent ideas thrown around. The tardigrade and the spore drive, Lorca and the mirror universe, Sarek and Burnham, their relationship, Ash Tyler and Vok and his relationship with L'Rell, Harry Mudd's revenge, and considering this was season 1, every character also had to be introduced with a special focus on Burnham's backstory. That's a lot. The season simply had trouble paying off the many plot lines it started and ultimately seemed to rely a lot on cliffhangers and reveals. Most of the hype for the show came from the speculation and fan theories rather than the show itself. And then a lot of the events that took place or decisions characters made seemed to be there simply because the writers needed that to move on with their story. Arguably though, those are the faults of the times we live in. Star Wars The Force Awakens being a prime example of that. Ironically, in that sense, Discovery is like all the other iterations of Star Trek, a victim of its own era. Star Trek. Shows about the future that encapsulate the past. Moving on, Star Trek Discovery is dark. Well, the first season was, at least. Not just visually, but also in themes. I mean, everything is always so dramatic. Every episode has got this heavy tension, and even though they constantly remind us the values of the Federation count more than anything else, the show is sneaky. Discovery always finds a way to stay within the utopian vision, but only show us terrible things on screen. I suppose that could be justified by the fact we're witnessing a war, but on a very basic level, I would have liked to see more humor, camaraderie, and general happiness. Of course, we also need to address Discovery's coherence within the greater universe that is Star Trek, and look, Discovery, technology-wise, alien-wise, feels somewhat out of place. That's the emotional response I get. But when I take the time to actually analyze every element, I can't truly complain. It's as out of place as Enterprise, and yet I accept that show. Based on that, dismissing Discovery would make me a hypocrite. You all know I'm not one to say aesthetics don't matter, and I will certainly never be one to accept the look of the Klingons if they remain unexplained, but I got to admit, the team behind Discovery made a point of bending canon rather than breaking it. So with a bit of explaining, it all works. Notice how Discovery never quite breaks the rules, be it with visual canon, in-universe historical accuracy, or even with the general theme of the franchise. Discovery finds a way to make its radical vision work. Kinda like that one guy we all know that when playing a board game will do something completely ridiculous but argues there's nothing about not doing it in the rulebook. We find ourselves forced to concede, but there's a sour taste in our mouth. The only thing I haven't really talked about at this point is social commentary, and believe it or not, Discovery did have some, even if it was basic and straightforward. The show faced the all-inclusiveness of the Federation with the xenophobic and separatist ideals of both the Klingon and Terran empires. One could say that these empires metaphorically represent some of the countries, or at least their leaders, we all have in real life. Though it was a little thin, it still was a plus. It's always fun to be able to observe ourselves through the lens of entertainment. Okay, I think that's about it. The production value is amazing, there's no denying that. The show simply lacks a little substance. The plot lines didn't quite feel polished. Chapter 2, excluding the finale, was much better than Chapter 1, and based on that, we can only hope, fingers crossed, that Season 2 will be even better. The show has potential. Look, if I'm willing to accept the missteps of The Orville Season 1, then I'm willing to accept the missteps of Discovery Season 1. The characters are interesting. All that's missing is an adventure worth sending them on. That being said, I will be watching Season 2, of course. Will you? What did you think of the first season? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Please tell me, leave a comment. I love reading comments, I love replying to them, and thank you very much for watching. Oh, and remember to like, subscribe, share, and most importantly, live long and prosper.